Welcome to the Weather Farm, where we break down the weather systems and storms that are impacting the United States over the next 48 to 72 hours. Plus, we break it down region by region so you can be best prepared for the weather that's going to impact your backyard over the next 2 days. Let's dive right into our forecast. As we begin our Monday morning, we are watching an area of showers across parts of northern Arizona into New Mexico, as well as the second area of showers across parts of Montana into North Dakota. These two areas are going to combine as a low pressure develops over northeastern Colorado during the day on Monday, and that's going to provide the mechanism that's going to fuel some severe weather from places like Minnesota down through the panhandle of Texas. And across Florida this morning, we're seeing scattered showers and storms, but as we get into that heating of the day, we know how it goes during the summer months. We have a daily chance of afternoon thunderstorms across parts of Florida, and some of those could be heavy as we get into our afternoon. So we'll continue to watch those. So let's put our map into motion. As we go through the day on Monday, we're going to watch that low pressure system start to develop by the time we get to about 5 p.m. Eastern across parts of northeastern Colorado. Along, we're going to see a line of storms stretching from near the Canadian border back towards central Nebraska, as well as some scattered storms across parts of western Kansas down through Oklahoma into the panhandle of Texas. In fact, the Storm Prediction Center has highlighted this area with a slight risk of severe weather during our day on our Monday. They've also highlighted areas from the Canadian border down to the Mexico border as being under a marginal risk of severe weather. And as we look at the tornado threat, we do have a small area of tornadoes here in far southwestern Nebraska, northwestern Kansas, and northeastern Colorado. It's only a 2% chance. The primary threats that we're going to see on our Monday is going to be hail as well as wind. We don't have any hatched areas of hail, so the hail size will probably stay less than 2 inches in diameter, but it is something that we're going to continue to watch and monitor here at the Weather Farm. Jumping back to our map, let's see how this plays out during the day. So as we go through the evening on Monday, we're going to watch an area of some severe weather across central Nebraska and even some down here towards Wichita, even in far southwestern Oklahoma. These are going to continue to form into a line of storms. It's why we don't think the tornado threat is going to be as severe. It's mainly going to be heavy rain and strong wind. But as we go through the night Monday, we're going to lose that daytime heating and all that energy. So these storms are going to just be more heavy rain producers rather than severe. But the thing that's going to be impactful as we go into our Tuesday is we see a line of storms forming in the morning, stretching from northern Missouri down through central Texas. Does this line of storms stabilize the atmosphere across this area enough on Tuesday morning that we don't see a secondary line of storms form behind it? This model, however, wants to say that those storms are going to happen Tuesday morning, but we're going to see enough clearing and enough sunshine during the day on Tuesday that we're going to get a secondary line of storms forming from central Wisconsin down through Iowa, down towards the Dallas area in association with that low pressure system. And then as we go through the day, Tuesday night into Wednesday, the storms are going to lose their intensity. It's going to become a line of storms as it makes its way into the Great Lakes and the Ohio Valley. And for our Wednesday, we're mainly going to have just heavy rain stretching from near Chicago down through eastern parts of Texas. And as we go through the rest of the week, we really don't see the chance of severe weather anywhere across the United States until we get to about Thursday night into Friday. We're going to watch another short wave that's going to move out of the Four Corners region into the southern plains. This could be enough that's going to spark some thunderstorms across parts of Oklahoma by the time we get to Friday morning. But a lot of this is going to be dependent if we get the right mechanisms and right ingredients to come together at the right time to help generate these storms. So that's why I'm saying there's a chance by the time we get toward the end of the week, but it's not set in stone. So tune back later this week for your latest forecast. And what's driving this is our jet stream. We have a strong ridge across the central plains and that deep dive across the northeast. That's providing that cooler than normal temperatures across that area. We also have a dip here across parts of Montana into Idaho, letting some slightly cooler air move in. But here's that first area of low pressure that's going to move into northeastern Colorado during the day on Monday, and right behind it is another area of low pressure. So as we put this jet stream into motion, we watch that first storm. That's going to generate those showers and severe weather as we get more buckle in the jet stream across the northern plains, dipping down toward Colorado and Kansas. We're going to have strong southwesterly winds out ahead of that. That's going to help fuel those thunderstorms Monday into our Tuesday. But as we go throughout the week, we're going to watch that secondary wave kind of fall apart by the time we get to Thursday, as it's over Utah and Arizona. And so that's why we're going to watch. There may be enough spin still here in the atmosphere. The jet stream wants to indicate that. There may be enough momentum in the upper levels that we could spin up a thunderstorm or two Friday. So we're going to have to continue to watch this. But then the main energy as we get into next week, it's going to be a zonal flow from west to east. So we're going to have pretty calm conditions across the United States as we begin the second week of June. In fact, if we look at our temperature anomalies for our Monday, we can clearly see where the battle lines are going to be drawn. Out across parts of Nebraska into Minnesota, temperatures are going to be running 15 to 20 degrees above your seasonal norms. We're going to see temperatures well into the 80s and 90s for this area. Whereas as across the Dakotas, back into northeastern Wyoming, southeastern Montana, temperatures are 20 to 25 degrees below seasonal. So we have 50s and 60s behind the front, 80s and 90s ahead of it, and right through that middle is where we're going to see the battle lines for that severe weather. And as we go into Tuesday, though that colder air continues to move in, parts of Kansas, you could be approaching 30 degrees below your seasonal norms by the time we get to Tuesday afternoon. Out ahead of the storm, not as warm as we see on our Monday, 5 to 10 degrees above seasonal norm, but clearly a temperature gradient is going to exist over this part of the country. And as we get to Wednesday, we really see that fall apart. We will see some slightly cooler air moving in through the upper Great Lakes into the Ohio Valley, but not to the extent on our Tuesday. Let's go ahead and put our maps into motion as we move across the Central Plains through our Monday. So by the time we get to about 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, we're going to watch those scattered storms start to fire across parts of Colorado, making their way into Nebraska, even some storms forming into the panhandle of Texas. These are all individual discrete cells, but we don't believe that they're going to rise to the level of being severe weather because they're going to quickly congeal into a line of storms, especially across Nebraska here, and across southwestern Kansas, a cluster of storms, as well into southwestern Oklahoma. And that's going to be the main thing as we go through the night. They're going to kind of cluster together. They're going to lose their daytime heating. But as we get to Tuesday morning, this is what I'm talking about. From Iowa down through Missouri into eastern Oklahoma, are these storms strong enough that they help stabilize the atmosphere across Nebraska and Kansas and western Missouri and Iowa? Or are we going to see a secondary round of severe weather as we go through the day? This model is wanting to hint that atmosphere is going to stabilize for a short period of time, but then become destabilized in the afternoon as we see more severe cells starting to pop on this map ahead of the cold front that's making its way through Kansas and southeastern Nebraska. Let's look down here across Texas as well at our future radar. As we go through the day, Monday, we're watching an area of storms that's going to make their way through the Rio Grande Valley into the panhandle of Texas. Scattered, isolated, severe weather is possible. That's going to move into Oklahoma overnight Monday into Tuesday. And then on Tuesday morning, we're going to also see some more storms refiring in those same areas across West Texas. Those are going to die out by the time they get to the Dallas metro area for our Tuesday afternoon. But isolated, scattered, severe storms are possible across central Texas for our Tuesday. The thing that is likely is going to be the warm temperatures, 80s and 90s surging all the way to the Canadian border, back through central Texas, where you could be in the mid to upper 90s as we get down towards San Antonio, down towards Corpus Christi. 80s and 90s across the southeast, even 60s and 70s into the northeast, where you've been pretty cool this past weekend. Out across Montana and the Dakotas, where we saw that temperature anomaly, we're seeing those temperatures held down in the 50s and 60s. So again, you can clearly see where those battle lines are going to be drawn in terms of our temperatures and the threat of severe weather. As we make our way to Tuesday, those cooler temperatures make their way through Wisconsin, Iowa, down through Kansas, 50s and 60s, but we're quickly warming on the backside of this, 60s and 70s across the Dakotas, out across California, the desert Southwest, you're in the 90s to 100s, as well as into Texas, far southern Texas, we could be approaching 100 degrees, but that warmth is surging north. Grand Rapids, Michigan, you could be in the lower 90s. Chicago, you could be touching 90 for the first time by the time we get to our Tuesday. Saginaw, you could be at 87 degrees. So we're going to watch that warmth continue to move east as we go through the week. And by the time we get to the Wednesday, the 80s are making their way into New York State and to the Northeast. Maine, Boston, you all have a chance of running at 80 degrees. 90s for Nashville, down along Louisiana and down in far southern Texas. But where that cold air has moved in, as that cold front moves through the Central Plains into the Ohio Valley, temperatures across Kansas and Oklahoma have cooled down into the 70s. 70s in the panhandle of Texas, but out across the Pacific Northwest, we are heating up once again. Temperatures there in the 80s and 90s for parts of eastern Washington and Oregon. So let's take this region by region over the next 48 hours. For our Monday, highs are generally going to be in the 50s and 60s across Maine and the upper New England, 60s and 70s as we get toward Pennsylvania, 70s through Virginia and back towards Ohio. As we go to our Tuesday, we're going to see 80s across Ohio, eastern Kentucky into West Virginia, 70s and mid to upper 70s across Pennsylvania and New York, even 70s stretching up into Maine. And by the time we get to our Wednesday, it is 70s and 80s. Northern Maine, you could be at 80. Holton, Maine, you could be at 80 degrees. We have 80s across central Ohio, West Virginia, Virginia. It's only in those mountainous and those higher elevations that we see slightly cooler temperatures. In terms of our precipitation, by the time we get to Wednesday, those storms are really not going to make their way to the East Coast by the time we get to Wednesday. So any precipitation we see is going to be light in nature, generally less than 1/4 of an inch. As we look across the south, we're seeing 80s and 90s. Southern Florida, where you were under those thunderstorms on your Monday, temperatures are going to be held down into the 70s. And as we go to our Tuesday, it's almost a repeat of the same thing, 80s and 90s. We are going to see a little more cloud cover across the southeast, across southern Georgia, most of Florida and the Carolinas. That's going to help limit temperatures there on our Wednesday into the 70s and 80s. But we have 80s across Tennessee, back through Arkansas into Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. If you're beginning your summer vacation, you're taking a trip down to the Gulf, weather looks great for you over the next 48 hours. In terms of our precipitation, the heaviest amounts of rains are going to be from central Florida and south, where we could see 2 to 5 inches of rain over the next 48 hours. Elsewhere, light amounts are expected. Looking across Texas, we're going to see temperatures in the 90s, approaching 100 in some spots. Oklahoma, you're going to be in the 80s, as well as Arkansas for your Monday. As we go to our Tuesday, we're going to watch that warmth kind of settle down a little further south. Temperatures not as warm as they have been, 80s and 90s across Texas, as well as New Mexico. Across Kansas, you're cooling down to the 50s and 60s, but we're seeing that warm surge up into the Tennessee and Ohio valleys with 80s and 90s for your Tuesday. In terms of our Wednesday, that cooler air does sink all the way down into central Texas. We're going to get a quick reprieve, 70s and 80s for your afternoon highs, though down in far southern Texas, you're still approaching 100 degrees. Out across parts of Arkansas and Louisiana, we're looking at temperatures in the 90s. In terms of our precipitation, it's really going to be dependent on where you get those severe thunderstorms to set up, and do we see any training with storms moving over the same area day after day after day. But through Wednesday, we could see widespread 1 to 2 inches across most of Oklahoma into north central Texas. As we move a little bit further south towards Austin, towards San Antonio, lesser amounts, about 1/2 of an inch of rain, as well as under 1/4 of an inch for most of New Mexico into southeastern Colorado. Looking at the Central Plains, 80s stretching all the way up to the Canadian border, some 90s for Iowa, western Illinois, and northeastern Missouri for your Monday highs. By the time we get to Tuesday, that warmth does move east. We're seeing 80s into far northern Michigan. Back behind it across Wisconsin, Iowa, into Nebraska and Kansas, temperatures are cooling down into the 50s and 60s under those thunderstorms. But back across the Dakotas, we are warming up again into the 60s and 70s. And that warming resumes on our Wednesday with widespread 70s across the northern plains, 80s stretching over into the Ohio Valley as they make their way over towards Pennsylvania. In terms of precipitation, the heaviest amounts are going to be in Nebraska, Iowa, and this little bullseye in southeastern Nebraska, northeastern Kansas, and northwestern Missouri, where you could see 2 to 4 inches of rainfall. Elsewhere, widespread 1 to 2 inches as those storms continue to move through the upper Great Lakes Valley. Looking at the northern plains, on our Monday, 50s and 60s behind that front across the Dakotas and Montana. Out ahead of it, it's 80s and 90s across parts of Iowa. A little bit warming across the Dakotas back into the 60s for your Tuesday, whereas Iowa, you're down into the 50s. And as we make our way into Wednesday, slightly cooler temperatures across the Dakotas back into the 60s. But most of Minnesota, Iowa, into Nebraska, you're warming into the 70s. And as we mentioned, the heaviest amounts of rains are going to be through central Wisconsin, Iowa, back into southeastern Nebraska. 1 to 2 inches of rain are likely by Wednesday. Across the Southwest, temperatures in the deserts are approaching 100 degrees, as well as the interior of California making their way up into Northern California. We could see triple digits on our Monday. As we make our way to our Tuesday, much of the same. The deserts are warm. The interior of California is warm as well. And as we go into Wednesday, it's going to be pretty much the same type of weather over the next 48 to 72 hours for most of the Southwest. And by the time we get to Wednesday evening, heaviest amounts of precipitation are going to fall over parts of Arizona and southern Utah. California, you're not really getting in on the rainfall, nor are you in Nevada. As we jump into the Pacific Northwest, it's 50s and 60s for our Monday. Eastern Washington, you're holding on into the mid to upper 70s and warming into the 80s with some downsloping winds that are going to help raise those temperatures for you on your Tuesday. Else, west of the Cascades, places like Seattle, we're seeing you approaching the low 70s for your Tuesday. And as we go into our Wednesday, we're continuing to warm across this area with widespread 80s and 90s. We can even see some 90s in far southwestern Idaho and 80s across parts of eastern Oregon. In terms of our precipitation, that is going to be far and few between over the next 48 to 72 hours, as much as rainfall is not expected. And as we make our way towards the second week of June, what we're going to see is we're going to see the central part of the United States. We're going to see a little bit of a pattern flip where you've been above normal temperatures for this week. Next week, you're going to be below normal or near average for a good chunk of the United States. The real warmth is going to be out west along the southern states into the northeast. And in terms of our precipitation for the second week of June, highest chance of above normal precipitation is going to be from Colorado through the Central Plains, the Tennessee and Ohio valleys, down through Florida, making its way up into Pennsylvania, as well as the northern Great Lakes. You could see above normal precipitation. But out west, it's going to continue to be dry, as we just saw for the regional outlook in the Pacific Northwest. We thank you for joining us here at the Weather Farm for your Monday. We hope you have a wonderful day. Stay tuned to your local forecast. If you are in the path of severe weather, make sure you have a way to get those weather alerts on your phone, or if you have a weather radio in your home. And if tornadoes are in your area, know what your plan is to be safe. We'll see you again on Wednesday.